Turtle Tracks podcast. This is your host, Brian VanHooker, and I'm here with Rich Hedden and Tom McWeeney, writers and artists who worked on the Mirage run of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. First of all, guys, thank you so much for being here. I appreciate it.
Nope, thanks for having us.
Hey, cowabunga, Brian, cowabunga.
Before getting into it, I want to kind of fill the audience in a little bit. So, for those who aren't super familiar with the Mirage comics, they're reached a point in around issue 20 or so that it kind of just got too crazy for Eastman and Laird to run the entire company of Turtles and do this comic book every month. So they kind of farmed it out to some degree as like an anthology series. And Hedden and McWeeney did issues number 34, as well as issues 38 through 40, and had one of the more bizarre takes in the Turtles ever in the history of the series. So I wanted to talk about your guys' take on the Turtles. Before getting into that, though, I guess... but first of all, you guys are best known for Roachmill, and that's where you guys have established yourselves. And then, did Eastman and Laird reach out to you guys? Did you know them?
No.
Get end up on Turtles?
No. Actually, I was very good friends at the Kubert School with Eric Talbot, who, as you know, is well acquainted. He's friends with Kevin Eastman. So when he graduated the school, he moved back up there, and he actually started doing work for the Turtles. And, he was following Roachmill. And all of a sudden, one day, out of the clear blue, Eric calls me up and says, "You guys should do turtle work." And, we were doing our own, create our own thing at the time. And Eric just, he sold me on it. He's like, the pay is good. If you create characters for the book, Kevin will let you keep them if you want. He was giving me all the sort of pluses to doing a story for the Turtles. So I, was like, okay, I called Rich up, said, "Want to do a turtle story?" He's like, "Sure, let's do it." So it really happened kind of that fast. Like, there was not a big, we didn't have to try out. We didn't, Eric put in a word for us, gave us, I think, the phone number for the main office, and then that was it. And the ball was rolling, and we got our first turtle story.
Yeah, I happen to know Eric. I roomed with him for a couple of years at the Kubert School. We both had a new Eric too. So it was real easy.
Yeah, when we were at the Kubert School, Eric, I actually thought that Eric was the most talented guy in my second year class. I always thought he was going to be if there was somebody going to break out from our second year class, it was going to be Eric. And so as a result, Eric was sort of a perpetual doodler. Like he would fill sketchbooks and stuff. Like I wasn't like that. I could not sit down and sketch. So I would have him. He would do sketchbook stuff, and I would just I'd say, "Hey, that drawing of the Hulk, can I ink that?" And he would just tear it out and give it to me. So I was inking a lot of his stuff, not published stuff, but just because I liked to ink his drawings. His drawings were really, they had just like a great energy to them. So that's how I knew Eric. And that's why, I said, that's why he reached out to Rich and I. So.
Yeah.
Very cool. And what was it like? I don't know. Did you work at all with Eastman and Laird on the first one or any of them? Did you have to correspond with them and clear stuff with them, or?
Not a thing.
No.
I mean, I think that's as I was talking. I think that's what got us into trouble. I think that's what got us into trouble was the fact that there seemed to be no editorial oversight over that book at all. Like it was. We dealt with a woman mainly named Deb Toffoli, who she was sort of, I don't know what maybe at the time I knew what her position was up there, but she was the one we would call when we needed something, Rich would just go off, rough out the story, send it to me. If I had any changes, I would make them. If I didn't, we would send it along. And then we just get sort of the go ahead to do it. And, that was the sort of the beauty of it was we just, sort of, they never made a single change. And trust me, we did stuff that, we did stuff in those books that to this day, that I still get people coming up to me and going, how did you get away with drawing Splinter on the toilet? Because we did. Rich did scene where Splinter is in quote unquote his meditation room, and it cuts to the meditation room, and it's Splinter in the bathroom, and there's like Play Rat magazine on the floor, and there's and I remember people who worked for Mirage, like other artists, even said, no, nobody came to you and said, hey, maybe you should change this, and I'm like, no, not at all, not a thing, not a word.
And this is when Turtles is literally the biggest children's property in the country.
Oh yeah, and
so funny.
There was a scene in Spaced Out where all the turtles are laying in bed and they're dreaming of some sexy turtle girl, and I think to some degree, and the reason we kind of got away with it was because the first two turtle stories we did weren't like that. So we did Toidle Anxiety, and then we did the Turtle Soup short story, which were pretty straightforward turtle stories. And so, we didn't say, hey, we have this idea for this really wacky, over the top, sort of Ren and Stimpy like turtle story. We didn't say that to them. We just said, we have another idea for a story. And they were like, great, send it in, and we'll put you on the schedule. And so I think it was a bit of unintentional bait and switch, to be honest with you. I think they were expecting another Turtle Soup or another Toidle Anxiety, but they got this other thing instead. And now they were sort of locked into it because they told us, they committed to us, and which, to their credit, was what was so great about Mirage. Like other comic company would have been just like, there's no way we're doing this,
Right.
So yeah, I think that's kind of how that first one, how Spaced Out Part 1, 2, and 3 got through.
Well then, yeah. But we just wanted to do one thing to make clear. When I said before that there were certain issues that there was no quality control, I was referring to our issues. Just
I mean, I guess rewinding back. So,
here's the thing: they did 3 of those issues, and then they gave us a color special. So who knows?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
I mean,
yeah.
They did give us a color special.
It could have been those photos. Maybe those incriminating photos we had. I don't know.
But they did. They gave us the color special, but I also knew, because I heard straight from someone at Mirage, that Spaced Out, the first part of the Spaced Out story, was the first turtle book that didn't break the 100,000 mark in sales.
I'm sure.
And that each successive part dropped by like 15% in sales. And
we were
that the book never really fully recovered from the torpedoing of Hedden and McWeeney.
Really?
Now, I don't know.
I did not know that.
That is what I heard. I heard that from a very reliable source at Mirage.
Wow.
About and that's why when we were given the color special, as politely as she possibly could, because she did not want to sort of step on Kevin is the one who gave us the color special.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
I ran into him at, I believe, San Diego Con, and he kept saying, I love your turtle books. I think they're great. You want to do another one? I'm like, sure. You don't have to twist my arm. And so he gave us the color special. And I remember when I called Deb Toffoli to tell her or bring it up with her, she sort of very politely tried to say she had no idea why they were giving us a color special. Like she was nice about it, but she was like, yeah, I don't know how you managed to pull this off, pretty much was what she was saying. And I'm like, I don't either, to be honest with you. So
yeah, it's like, hey, you guys designed a Titanic. Now we want you to do this other boat for us.
Pretty much.
I mean, I guess rewinding back to the first one, Toidle Anxiety. So for people who haven't read it or need a little memory jogging, Toidle Anxiety is about this guy who's a goon in the mob, and the turtle stops some random crime, and then he gets driven crazy by it. He goes to a mental institution, he buys a bunch of guns and all this. Like, do you remember anything about the development of that one that stands out to you?
That's you, Rich.
Well, actually, Tom, you mentioned this before, where that came from. So
yeah. Well, it's an homage. It's an homage to one of the Frank Miller Daredevil issues, where
Yeah,
Bullseye is
that's
slowly
right.
going crazy
Okay.
because he can't kill Daredevil, and he starts imagining everybody in New York City dressed as Daredevil. And there's this great double page spread Miller did where
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Bullseye's in the middle of like Times Square, and everyone from middle-aged women to little kids are all dressed like Daredevil. Right.
You guys
Right. And so he
like mimic that with yours.
right. So
Right.
that was the sort of seed of toil anxiety. But I remember when Rich sent me the roughs for that to read the story, and I was going over it, he says to me something to the effect of like, yeah, it's about this mob guy, he gets, who gets beat up by a bunch of turtles. So, that would drive anybody crazy. He's this tough mob guy, and hey, I got beat up by turtles. And I don't know, that line just sort of stuck with me. I'm like, yeah, it's pretty funny. Like,
Okay.
he's got to go to his mob boss friends and explain how his drug shipment didn't get through because a bunch of turtles beat him up.
This isn't a visual podcast, so I should mention this. There's a spread in that issue of issue 34 where it's him and maybe just maybe it's Times Square, but like a crowded city street, and you see hundreds of different turtle characters, and they're fantastic. It's this amazing spread that's really worth checking out. And
right.
And then the episode, and then the issue just ends with him killing himself, which
so it ends with a suicide. So
now,
yeah, I mean,
go ahead, please.
I was just gonna say, it's like he's got to either learn to live in a world filled with turtles or not.
Yeah.
I always thought of that like I mean, in the story, it is legitimately like a guy killing himself, but I always looked at that as sort of almost like a Warner Brothers thing, where like there was a lot of Warner Brothers cartoons that ended with characters blowing their brains out,
right?
Know, and it's like, but.
Do you guys know? I don't, forgive me, I don't know how you guys work. For these, did you draw them together? One drew one. Like, how did you find for this issue? Because the art style changes later. How did you find your design on the turtles for that one?
That would be Rich. Rich would write, he would pencil, and I would ink, and I acted as sort of a soft editor on things. He would send me the roughs, and if I like, well, I would make sometimes minor changes in it, but with the turtle stuff, I don't remember making a single change in any of it. Like, it was all pretty there on the page with the roughs. Like, maybe one thing here, I usually have a pretty good memory for that kind of stuff. But I don't recall changing anything.
Then you went on to use the same designs so there's a story in Turtle Soup, where it ends up being this boy playing with a bunch of toys. I think it's like 3-4 pages. Is there anything to say about that story that stands out to you? It was a pretty straightforward story, but still with a good amount of comedy in it, like you were saying.
I think probably once again, in my fuzzy recollection of that kind of anything, but really factually, I think it may have been inspired by the fact that that's when they were actually coming out with turtle toys at that point.
Oh yeah, sure.
So I guess that I can see that being an inspiration for it. Like, what would it be like for a kid playing with his toys, and then let's do a story, and then we find out that's what it is. That's where I'm sort of thinking that's probably where it came from.
It also reminded me a little bit of we had an assignment at the Kubert School in second year, and the whole idea was to take characters, put them in an environment, and a strange environment that doesn't really you can't quite figure out where they are, and then the final reveal was that they're not where you expect them to be. And in the example that was used for the layout was that, like, that the characters are, actually really small, and they're on a, like in a planter or something, instead of being in a jungle. It looks like a jungle, but no, they're just actually really tiny, and they're, and yours was great, Rich. I remember that. Yours was one of the best ones in the class. And his story was that it was a spaceship going through like an asteroid field. And it was these guys, that's what it seemed like anyway. And then the final reveal, the asteroid field starts to break up, and the whole sort of fabric of space starts to like shake, and there's like this blinding light, like they're going into like a white hole. And it's a kid with a box of Cracker Jacks, and he's pouring them into his hand, and the ship is the prize, and the Cracker Jacks. And when you sent me that story, that was my first thought. Was this seems like a variation on that idea, which is
possible. It's possible, you know. We were,
Yeah.
yeah, that's possible. The kind of ending. I mean, your story was good too from that thing. I think it ended up Joe published it.
yeah, he published it, much to my chagrin.
Oh, still going. I don't want to give it away. So
It was terrible. It was terrible because I didn't know he was going to publish it. If I had known he was going to publish it, I would have worked way harder on it. But it was just another homework assignment, and I cranked it out over a weekend, thinking, you know, I did not like mine at all. Yours I thought was the best in the class, just from the way you took the concept and ran with it. But enough of that.
Yeah.
My favorite, the reveal. There's the final page where the mother is yelling at the kid, and my favorite detail was there was a popped turtle blimp shoved in a aquarium, like, which I thought was such a great detail.
Right, because that's what happened in the
right,
because that's what happened in the story. Everything you see in the story is then revealed in that final, you know, which I thought was great.
Was there a turtle blimp toy?
Yeah, it opens up with them in the turtle blimp. The very first panel is them in a blimp. And
did he actually have that though released back then?
Yeah,
I believe they did. Yeah. I remember commercials for it.
Yeah, me too. Now that we're talking about, I'm sort of seeing like the little kid with the... So yeah, I guess
you have one here. So it existed. Yeah.
All right. Okay.
Yeah, there's.
Oh, there it is. You don't keep yours in the aquarium though.
No.
Oh, okay. That's how you're supposed to use it. All right.
So you guys, did you get any reception or any reaction back from those stories at all? From fans or not? Well, or people who didn't like it, or from Eastman and Laird from those first two stories?
Well, when fans bump into me about after they ask for a refund, I usually say I can't do that. I just don't have the capabilities. I don't know. Did you? How about you, Tom? Have you had a lot of fans? You probably have more.
The only thing that I've had, and is in the final turtle story we did, the multi-turtle, was I've had more fans come up to me to discuss the splinter on the toilet panel. Any other? No, I'm not exaggerating. I worked for DC. I worked for Wildstorm. I worked on the #1 selling book in the country for 1 month, which was Battle Chasers. And things people still bring up to me more often than anything was, man, I can't believe you guys drew Splinter sitting on the toilet. And I'm like, and you know, we didn't even give it a second thought when we did it. Like we just thought we thought it was funny. We just they'll laugh at this.
Where else do you go to meditate?
Yeah. And, you know, I guess it was sort of the naivety of youth, I guess. You know, there was just like, well, we think it's funny. Everyone else will think it's funny. The reactions I have had when people have come and talked about the Turtle book seem to be one of, they did not like it. They didn't like it. It was too, especially the spaced out story. Yeah. For those of you who are unfamiliar with it, is very, very cartoony, a la Ren and Stimpy, and New Adventures of My
Aliens, and then it turns into the story where they want to make him famous, and they're back on Earth, and there's a cow, and there's a whole bunch of shit. Ren and Stimpy even get thrown in the background, which I quite enjoyed.
Yes,
panel there, yes. But like it's a crazy story about Raphael getting abducted by aliens, and then shit happens.
And Kevin Eastman and Peter Laird show up in the background too.
Oh my god! I wanted to talk about that because
please let's talk about that.
Wait. So I guess getting into it first, where did Spaced Out come from? Did you have an idea that this is for turtles, or was it something like where did it start?
You're not waiting for me to answer that, are you?
Well, you wrote it, so we are kind of waiting for you to answer it.
I'm hoping you know, Tom. I'm like, I have no idea.
Well, I can tell you the seeds. I can only tell you the seeds of sort of like not how the actual story developed, but why that story came to be.
Oh, okay. All right.
Which is, and Rich and I were discussing this just last week, which is, on Roachmill had a lot of humor in it, but it was still sort of a dark black comedy, somewhat satire of the Punisher in a way. But at that time, in the mid late '80s, as I mentioned earlier, New Adventures of Mighty Mouse came on TV, and then later on Ren and Stimpy, and we were getting kind of way excited about that stuff.
Mhm.
So there was a part of us sort of itching to do something like that without sort of verbally saying it to one another. Hey, we should just do a really cartoony
Mhm.
thing.
Yeah.
And so I think it was almost like this collective unconscious between the two of us, where we both kind of wanted to do a crazy, over the top Ren and Stimpy type story, and then all of a sudden the turtles get dropped in our lap, and Rich is just like, bingo, this is it. It's go time. It's like,
Let's
who
take
cares if we wreck this? If we wreck this IP, we're gonna do it how we want to do it. And we didn't. There was no malice toward the turtles. It was just like, hey, this will be fun. So,
No,
but
sure.
I think that definitely you could trace a line back to the very first episode of the New Adventures of Mighty Mouse, where that aired, and I'll never forget it. I didn't watch it because at that point, most Saturday morning cartoons were garbage. And Rich called me up at about 11 o'clock, 12 o'clock that day and was like, did you watch this new Mighty Mouse cartoon? And I'm like, no. And he's like, watch it next week. That's all he said to me. I'm like, really? Was it that good? He goes, just watch it. And I started watching it from there on in. And it was like unlike anything that was on Saturday morning at the time. And we just got way into that show. Like, this is great. Like, just the risks it was taking, like, So, yep, you can trace it. You can blame Ralph Bakshi and John Kricfalusi for Spaced Out.
I'm embarrassed, but I don't know that show. I know the '50s Mighty Mouse or whatever the hell it was from. I don't know. I have to check that out. I really don't know.
Yes, it aired in '87, I think.
Yeah, I would say
86 or 80. It was '87, I believe, because it was right after we graduated.
Huh.
And Ralph Bakshi produced it. It only lasted 2 seasons, and the first season was, heavily influenced by John Kay, who went on to do Ren and Stimpy. And it's just bananas. Like they just went crazy with the characters in a great way. And
yeah, I mean, you still had to conform to probably like certain things for Saturday morning, like what's rules, not rules is a better word, but you could only do so many things, but they pushed the boundaries as much as possible.
And the real
have them act and move and look at things.
The real striking thing about it was how it looked.
Yes,
it
absolutely.
Just did not look like anything. You're talking about a period where it was like the Care Bears and Snorkels, and everything was My Little Pony. Like, it was Saturday morning was just a graveyard of cutesy kitty properties. And then all of a sudden, stuck at, like, I don't remember, it was kind of late in the day, like 11 o'clock on Saturday morning, was this bizarre, like actual cartoonists had gotten together finally to put together a cartoon show for Saturday morning for the first time in, 35 years. And it was jaw-dropping. Like, I watch them now and they are crude, and, they're not quite as funny as I remember them, but there's still a manic energy to them that was, addictive, really, to both Rich and I. Like, it just right into our heads like a lightning bolt. And at the very least, do yourself a favor. I'm pretty sure it's on eBay. They did a spoof of Batman called Night of the Bat. Do yourself a favor and watch that episode. It's brilliant. It's just crazy and fun, and the design of the main character is spectacular. All the designs on that show. To this day, I still have, I'll go online and dig up model sheets and look at them, and I'm like, this was
I'll check this out.
Really, really good stuff.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that was definitely a major inspiration.
Yeah. Yep. I always said until the Bakshi Mighty Mouse came out, I wanted to be Frank Miller. And then once that came out, I wanted to be John Kay. Like it was like practically overnight. Like it's like I want to do this stuff. This is great.
Yeah.
So
the jumping back to Turtles, when you guys spaced out for those issues, your Turtles go under a huge redesign. I'm curious why you felt the need to do that. I mean, thematically it makes sense, but I'm curious like how you found that and why you felt the need to do it, because it was a big leap from what you'd done visually before. I'm guessing it's more of a Rich question.
Oh, is that my question?
Maybe. I'm not sure. If you remember why you redesigned your Turtles.
Well, that's the thing. I feel like I'm on. I'm that witness. Something else. I just don't recall.
No, that's fine. If not, it's no big deal.
I mean, I think it's probably exactly really what Tom just said. We were just we would try and fit it into Roachmill when we could too, here and there and stuff, and always will in some way. But like, it just happened. It was just like the designs of them were great. We studied them. We looked at them. It just kind of naturally happened. I almost think too that I looked a little bit just for the heck of it, and in that first spaced out issue, they're not super cartoony, but by the end, they become
they're practically abstract by the third installment.
The reactions were so Tex Avery too. Tex Avery and probably from John K.
Bob Clampett.
Yeah, I mean, there's this one thing I was just looking the other day. I was reading through it, and it was like, of all things, like I remember when Master Splinter taught us about stomach disorders.
Yeah.
And then he's like, and they're around this fire, and Master Splinter goes, and one day, my students, you may find yourself facing, and I can't remember verbatim, he goes, you may find yourself against the foe of acid indigestion. Because what will you do to combat it? And they just react like simpletons going, pizza! And look at their faces, like, what we made him into such for us, it should have been Teenage Moron Ninja Turtles. That's what we did to them.
Well, I remember at the time, Rich, you said to me, and I thought this was great, which was you said you viewed it as a single parent raising 4 obnoxious children. And that's what it was. Like Splinter was their cranky dad. There was no mom around to push the kids off on the mom. So he had to deal with them. And so most of the times he was at his like wit's end with them because they're just idiots. All they want to do is run around and eat pizza and, break things with their nunchucks. And I thought, okay, I can get behind that. That's brilliant.
That's not okay, it's not wrong.
It's a good dynamic. Like it's funny. Like there's fodder for humor there. Like you can't not turn that into something funny, But
so you guys you said that they reached out to you about doing more issues. Did they say, hey, we need something for 38, 39, 40? If you remember?
No,
I remember.
Don't worry.
Go ahead.
No,
my memory of it was no, they did not put a specific number of issues. And, they just said, hey, it was always like, do you want to do more turtle work? It was always kind of phrased like that. Do you want to do more? So we said, sure. So Rich roughed out, spaced out. If I recall right, at one point you were shooting for 2 issues, like to do it in 2 parts, because I do remember a phone call where I had to tell them that Rich might need a 3rd issue on this. And of course they hadn't seen it yet at that point. So they were like, sure, go ahead. Why not? You're good kids. Sure. 3 issues. You sure? Can we get you anything else? Can we get you a drink? Sure. 3 issues. And I remember then, he roughed out the whole thing and sent it in. And I didn't get a call saying, no way, we can't do this. And and that was it. Like, Kevin, to his credit and to his detriment, was like the nicest guy on the planet. And so he could never say no to anybody. And, that was great for us because there wasn't a lot of other companies beating our door down to give us work that actually paid. I mean, to give you sort of a sort of historical sense, like, comics at that time, for the first time ever, were kind of branching out beyond Marvel and DC. And, there was all these sort of companies that had sprung up, like Comico and First and Dark Horse. Mm-hmm. But the problem was is you could work for those companies, which we did, but they didn't pay well. You know, we worked for a company called Blackthorn, which is where we launched Roachmill initially for a year. And we were doing the entire book for $45 a page. That we split between the two of us. So that was pencils, letters, inks, writing.
Insane.
So then Dark Horse picks us up at the end of the year, and they give us a whopping raise to $85 a page to do Roachmill. So we do Roachmill for a few years, and we're living with our parents. I'm making just enough with Dark Horse to sort of pay my car insurance and make my car payments, but I'm not paying rent or anything. And then Eric comes along and offers us, you know, hey, you want to do this turtle job? And he tells us their page rate. I don't remember it off the top of my head, but it was a legit page rate at the time. It was like, oh, Rich is getting $145 to pencil, and I'm getting $120 to ink, or whatever it was at the time. It was comparable. It might even have been more than that. And then on top of that, you know,
Probably
Eric said every book makes royalties, and they're good royalty checks. And that turtle story could not have come across our desk at a better time, because, as I was saying to Rich last week, it was the first time in my life where my parents, who were very supportive about me being an artist and about having a career in art, and sent me to the Kubert School, me and my brother, my father started to sort of say, maybe this isn't what you should be doing. And then we got the turtle book, and he saw that first royalty check, and he was like, oh, okay. And he stayed off my back for the rest of my career, basically.
Oh, well.
But, you know, so, you know, the money can't be under, you know, we can't shy away from that. The money was very good. They treated us great. Like I said, no editorial control. It was free reign. And so it was the first sort of ideal situation, probably in comics at that, you know, maybe even in the history of comics, which is, you know, the only caveat is you have to draw their characters. You have to do the turtles, you know, which is fine, you know. So, yeah, it was, you know, it was great. Like, I can't.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. That was one of the most fondest times. Absolutely.
And there was no like like not only just restrictions given you, was there any guidelines like do your own?
Apparently not. Apparently not.
I've always said that I thought, like, especially as kind of we were knee deep in Spaced Out, like when we were like maybe midway through issue 2, I remember thinking to myself that Kevin and Peter probably, rather than just let any Joe jump on their turtle book and draw it and write it however they wanted to, with a little bit more foresight, they probably should have sort of split the turtles into 2 books, and they should have kept one turtle book as sort of the main continuity, drawn by, you know, a semi-realistic style that was sort of emulating what Kevin and Peter were doing. And then they could have, you know, because I know Kevin he loved giving work to cartoonists, which is such a great thing. He was a massive cartooning fan. So he needed to scratch that itch. He had money. He needed to, hey, I love your work. Let me give you work so that you can make a living at it, which is so alien to what was going on at that time. So I think if he had done that back in, say, the mid-'80s and said, you know, I'm going to keep the regular turtle continuity, we'll have a steady writer who kind of keeps it the same. But then we have this other book where, like, almost like a DC Elseworlds book.
Yeah.
Where, you know, for 2 issues, you know, this guy can jump on and do whatever he wants with the turtles. And then this team can jump on for an issue or 2 or 3 and do whatever they want with the turtles. And it'll be this sort of parallel turtle book. I think things would have went much better. But I think fans started to get really annoyed with them over the sort of constantly shifting tones and styles of that book. And of course, ours was probably the single most drastic shift. I don't specifically remember you might, Brian, but I remember at one point, one of the issues we did, one of the really cartoony issues we did, was either preceded by like a really realistic, gritty issue, or or followed by a really, and I thought to myself, this is going to be so glaring, like, you know, like style wise, like you're jumping from, you know, Michael Zulli doing the Turtles to like, you know, Hedden McWeeney. Like that's not good from any publishing marketing standpoint. Like,
I'll say as a fan, like I grew up with a cartoon, and I grew up
right.
with more with the Archie comic books, which were for the most part a pretty consistent series, certainly when compared to Mirage. I
Yes.
got into Mirage a little bit later, maybe as like a young teen or something. I can't remember exactly, but like it was surprising to me to, and I never got him in order or anything, to just see these like sort of like there was, I forget, I'm forgetting the artist, but there's one there's like these ultra realistic turtles back in time, and they look like they don't even look like the Ninja Turtles. Like your turtles look more like Ninja Turtles than theirs did, and it was like really serious and really cool, but it was just completely different. So like it was jarring to see that, um,
Right.
and then like the real like was, and to your point, like at some point, I think around issue 50 is when the same Mirage continuity picks up that they started back in issue 1. But yeah, it's definitely confusing to say the least.
Right.
How to go from like the main book to also delve into an anthology series and then come out of it occasionally. It was
Yeah.
jarring at the very least.
And that was definitely a result of the lack of strong editorial. They needed somebody at the head to say, look, okay, I get that Kevin wants to give work to his friends, and we are going to figure out a way to do that in the confines of, we don't want to tank our turtle book, but we want to, you know, and I think it all happened so fast.
Yeah.
I think, you know,
You were
it
always
wasn't
struggling
like
to hit deadlines too, I know. Like always. Like Mirage was notoriously late every month, I think.
that I don't recall, but I do like, and also too, like you were saying, you started with the cartoon.
Yeah.
You know, Rich and I and most comic book people started with the comic, where you know it started off. The cover of issue 1 is an homage to Frank Miller's Ronin.
Yeah.
Like it is, you know, really heavily rendered, like lots of line work. You know, so you know the book was kind of schizophrenic from the get-go, I think, to a degree, but that's okay because it worked to its advantage early on. It was sort of quirky and, you know, different. But I think with a little bit more, a little tighter grip on the reins,
Sure.
we could have done our spaced out story in its own little.
Well, I mean, it would have worked out if you guys just did it in Turtle Soup, which was like there was an endless appetite for turtle stuff at the time.
Yes, there was.
So like a whole nother series would have made perfect sense, and like it wouldn't have like the idea that these are the same turtles but not. I mean, maybe that's why you guys face such backlash, which I didn't know about. So like, when did you guys start get wind that turtle fans didn't like your turtles?
Oh, just for me, it was always at comic conventions.
It's so, I can't imagine going to a creator, anybody, even if I hated their work. I can't imagine ever going up to somebody being like, "I hate your shit." Like I can't fathom.
Oh man, no. I mean, it isn't like people would come up and say, "I hate your shit," but you'd be shocked at what people will say to you. Not this one wasn't to me, but this one just. I was online waiting to meet a comic book hero of mine when I was a kid, which was a guy named Herb Trimpe who worked for Marvel in the 70s.
Yeah.
And you know, and I'm sort of next in line, just trying to decide what to say to him, because I mean, honestly, without his work, I don't know if I would have been drawing comics. It was a big influence on me. And the guy right in front of me has got some original art he wants to get signed. He's got a double page spread from Herb's run on Marvel's Godzilla comic, right? So like, wow, that's great. Guys bringing his pages to get signed. He puts the pages down in front of Herb. Herb starts to sign them, and the guy says to him, "So, you know, I'm just wondering how come you didn't draw Godzilla in the comic like he looks in the movies?" And like Herb just sort of grits his teeth and keeps signing and goes, "I thought I did." And like now you'd think that would be the moment where you go, "Oh shit, I touched a nerve. Hey, I'm sorry, man. I didn't mean anything by it."
Right.
Nope. This guy doubles the fuck down, starts going, but no, really, it doesn't really look like him. Like, and then he starts describing, like, you made the teeth bigger and you made the snout longer. And And Herb's wife had to actually sort of very politely step in and tell the guy in a very, very nice way, he should probably shut the fuck up. I wanted to, I was so angry
Oh.
at that moment because it completely ruined any interaction now I was going to have with him because he was so upset that he got up to take a break. And now it's like, and I knew I wasn't going to get back there. I had a booth of my own.
Yeah.
So I never actually got to meet him as a result with this guy. But I would get stuff like that all the time. You know, people would come up and just say, you know, especially the cartoony stuff I did. Like I did a cartoony backup story for Gen 13 at the time, very similar to what Rich and I did on the Turtles. I'm very influenced by the Turtle story. It was a parody. And I had a woman come up to me very upset with what I did to her characters, her literally. And I reminded her that she didn't own them. And then I told her that, you know, I said, you know, Jeff Campbell gave me approval to do this story. Oh, did he? Okay. And then all of a sudden it was all right. But she initially came at me about it. Like she was not happy. She was gonna give me a piece of her mind. And you know, it happens. Fans have a disproportionate degree of ownership over stuff they read, and you know, they become very passionate about it. I mean, isn't that what Stephen King's Misery was all about? That's literally what that story's about.
Yeah, you're right. Absolutely. I mean, and frankly, like that's only gotten worse on social media.
It's a fan who not only feels ownership over these books she's reading, but enough to the point where she's actually taking physical pieces of the author. So she actually now claims ownership over his physical body too, which is what I love about that book, actually. So yeah, so you know, fans, you know, I'm forgiving for stuff like that. I was a fan myself once, but it is still sort of, it can be a jarring experience to have somebody. But yeah, no one ever came up to me and said, I really hated your Turtle books. But I've rarely signed any copies of them, which is always a sign that people didn't, you know, aren't like proud of them to bring you up. And when I used to do conventions, I'd bring pages to sell, and I would put the Turtle pages out, and like they might as well have been radioactive. It was like,
I know you said Kevin was supportive. Did you ever hear from Peter's reaction from it at all? Because he was a bit more confident with the Turtles, frankly.
Well, we do know that Peter was not happy with the caricature that Rich drew of him in Spaced Out number part 1.
He's like a foot tall.
And he's got like 3 curly hairs coming out of his head. And in typical Rich fashion, when I heard from somebody at Mirage that Peter is not happy with how you depicted him in your story, well, then Rich definitely had to stick him in one of the later issues again. So he winds up showing up, I think, in the 3rd installment. Yes. Him and Eastman going at each other, trying to blame each other for hiring us to work on the book. Yeah, but no, you know.
Yeah, it's so great.
Yeah, so you know.
So for those who are wondering, like, there's a point where, like, you cut to Mirage Studios and Eastman and Laird are fighting about having hired you two, which is great.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean. Other than that, I know Kevin liked our stuff. Kevin was, like I said, a massive fan of cartooning. He liked a lot of stuff. So, you know, it was always nice to hear. And the Mirage people, like I drove up there. I drove up there one time to hang out with them and to drop off work and talk about future. It was between projects, and you know, they were great people. The studio was awesome. Got to see the early stages of Kevin's cartoon museum. You know, it was
nice.
Yeah. But I mean, after we did, I believe it was the Maltese Turtle, they did try and get us. We started talks about maybe doing something for Tundra.
Oh.
And I drove up there. I drove up there to have a meeting with, I hope I don't get this wrong, but I think Stephen Bissett was in charge of Tundra at the time. I could be getting that wrong, so don't hold me to that. And I went up to have a meeting with them about, just, hey, if we were going to do something, what would it be? What would the parameters of the job be, et cetera, et cetera. And I went to the Tundra offices, and it was in this beautiful old brick building that they refurbished from top to bottom. It was super impressive, super like, wow, I totally get why they're giving me this tour. It's impressive. And while the guy's giving me the tour, I look at this one wall, and this wall is like 25 feet long. Like, this is not a short wall. And there are these dry erase boards that are like 7 feet tall and go and run the length of this wall. And they're broken into these grids from what I can remember. And there's green parts and there's red parts. And I turn to the guy and I go, what's this? What's this with this dry erase board? And he goes, oh no, this is great. He's like, this is great. This is our project board, right? Look, we keep track of all the projects. Here, this column here is all the outstanding projects. These are the creators involved. And he starts going down the list of what each thing is. And I go, oh, that's great. I'm like, well, what's the red and the green? And he goes, well, the green are projects we've gotten, that we've gotten in, and the reds are the outstanding projects. And that wall was a sea of red.
Oh, wow.
And I was telling Rich, I had this moment of clarity where I was like, not to circle back to the Titanic, but I was like, this is going to be a disaster. And so I did take that meeting with Tundra, but I knew, I was like, I'm not hitching my wagon to this horse. I'll tell you that much. Like, it was because Kevin couldn't say no to anybody. So, and not only that, but Tundra, again, Kevin trying to break the mold of shitty comic companies for 100 years was doing a lot of things that, were, from his standpoint, hey, we're making comics better, but, like he would pay up front for projects, so like, you give the guy the money to do the project, and then, you better keep your fingers crossed that it's going to get delivered. And judging by the amount of red on that board, there are a lot of people out there bilking Tundra and not turning stuff in. And, and of course there was no commercial oversight to it. So, they would, Kevin loved, David McKean. So he would hire him to do a book based off of Arkham Asylum. And, it would be this gorgeous painted piece of poetry, but who's going to buy this book?
Sure.
There was nobody sitting there going, well, we need stuff that's going to sell too. And that was my gist of Tundra. It was one of those rare occasions where the trappings of the whole thing didn't delude me. As soon as I saw that wall with all that red on it, I was like, this is not going to be around long. And I was right. The year before I took that tour, so I took that tour in the fall. So July or so was San Diego Con that year. And Tundra had the biggest booth in San Diego Con. It was actually, a friend of mine and I used to talk all the time how the Tundra booth of whatever year that was, 1991 or 90 or 91, was like a precursor for like what con booths would eventually become. It was like the first volley in like huge, big sized Comic Con booths. And then I took the tour that fall, and then next year at San Diego Comic Con, their booth was cut in half.
Oh, wow.
And then the year after that, they were gone. So it was a valiant idea, Tundra.
Oh, yeah.
It really was.
Yeah.
It really was. And but it was like, you still needed somebody who was going to crack the whip, make sure these projects got in on time, and not only that, but that the projects that you were actually putting out were going to have an audience. And there was a lot of really self-indulgent stuff that Tundra was funding, and that was I believe it was. I mean, I may not be getting this totally right, but wasn't the reason Kevin sold his stake in the Turtles because of Tundra, because of how much money he poured into Tundra?
I'm not sure. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know that for 100% sure, so I'm not gonna. But I think I remember hearing that, but you know.
I've got to run. I did want to ask you guys one more question each, if you don't mind. Rich, I'll start with you. Who's your favorite turtle and why?
Frank. Frank's my favorite turtle. No, I guess Raphael.
That's the thing. You based all your stories with Raphael, so I mean that I'm guessing.
Yes, I'm going to go with him. I mean, just in general for what the stuff we've done. I mean, I think with Tom and I, we've always tried to put the comic into the comic book, and I don't know if that's always, there's always been, like we were saying, an audience for that. So, which is fine. I mean, there are people that probably did like it and enjoy it,
especially in
all that stuff. So.
Well, especially in that time period, what Rich is saying. Well, I think a really cartoony turtle book would do better now. There's way more stuff on the market like that. Now, look at the latest animated film that came out. Like, it is very cartoony. Back in 89, 90, 91, the fans they hated that stuff, and they hated it because comics were finally getting this tiny little bit of degree of respect, and they looked at it as like, oh, look at these guys, they're dropping their pants and shitting all over it. And in actual fact, it's like, no, I'm serious. I mean, that's kind of the reaction. I used to have conversations with other guys during that period who were trying to do cartoony stuff, and it was nothing but misery. Like, nobody, good luck getting any traction. I actually had Neil Adams say that to me once.
Oh, wow.
I had Neil Adams say that to me. I showed him a story that Rich and I worked on for Dark Horse, where we did a very, very cartoony take on an old 50s superhero called Space Hawk. I had heard that Neil was a big fan of cartoony stuff, even though he didn't really draw in that style. And so I was like, sure, I'll show it to him. I love Neil's work. And I went up, and he looked at it and he was laughing, like he thought it was great. And then, in typical Neil fashion, he hands me back to the page. He goes, yeah, good luck getting that published. Right. And so I said to him, oh, it's already been published. I said, we published it to Dark Horse. And he just looked at me and went, oh, good for you. And, but that was the exception. The fans just hated that. They couldn't look at it as it's a loving take on something. They always looked at it as mockery. Oh, they're making fun of it. They're making fun of it. They're making fun of comics. They're making fun of people who like comics. And they could never separate that in that particular period. They could never separate those things. I think comic fans and just audiences in general now are more forgiving for that sort of stuff than they were back then.
Tom, who's your favorite turtle in the line? Oh, sorry. What were you saying?
The one that signed my checks was my favorite turtle. Honestly, I liked doing the turtle work. Sure. Was I a big fan of the book?
That's fine.
Not really. But it's certainly, I've worked on a lot worse things than the Turtles. And like I said, I loved Mirage. I loved Kevin. I loved all the people involved. But I didn't read the Turtles comic. I was a little too old. I remember reading one of the early issues. Somebody lent it to me, and I thought, okay, the appeal was the sort of, homemade look of the whole thing was kind of cool, and the fact that these guys had actually struck gold with it was really, I felt great for these guys. Like, how people don't realize how rare that is in anything.
Yeah,
but how rare it was in comics was non-existent prior to the Turtles.
Right, I would think, just to add in, just for a second.
Sure.
I think they even changed the course of the direct market. They made it possible for, like, the direct market, that the independent stuff to move forward. I mean, they were such a drive. I mean, and then people started imitating them. They started doing their version. Like, there was some kind of gerbil thing, I think, out there or something. Right?
Radioactive
animal things that follow. Yeah.
Radioactive black belt hamsters.
They were a major thrust, and they still are a major thrust.
Yeah.
And back then,
the whole black and white boom happened because of the whole black and white boom happened because of the Turtles, and we rode that wave. Like we would have, when we came out of the Kubert School, we weren't good enough to get work at Marvel and DC, but all these little small black and white comic companies had popped up, and we were pragmatic about it. We were like, we're not going to sit here and draw Spider-Man pages and send them to Marvel with our fingers crossed, like, oh, they're going to hire us to do Spider-Man, because they're not. So we were like, let's do our own thing, just get our foot in the door, and use that as a way to get better, which is what we did. I mean, the first few years of Roachmill was practice comics was really what it was. I mean, it was us learning how to draw and learning how to ink and learning how to letter. And, that never would have happened without the Turtles. It just wouldn't have.
Guys, I gotta run. Otherwise, I'm so sorry. I usually don't schedule things this close together, but this kind of went on the roll. But thank you for doing this. I seriously,
no problem.
Thank you guys both, seriously, and I'm sorry to cut off.
No problem. It was fun.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for the opportunity. Nice to meet you.
You too. Thank you guys both. I
honestly, it was one of the better ones that I've done. It was very fun.
That's good to hear. So thank you.
All right,
it's the best one I've ever done.
Good.
You're the only one though.
I know. Take care.
Right, take care, guys.
What is that? Come on, guys. Welcome aboard the Turtle Blimp. Does this thing actually work? Just watch. It's the Turtles' gigantic and wacky attack aircraft, the Turtle Blimp, featuring pistol grip and wacky bombs with trigger release. Cowabunga! And of course, with the detachable turtle glider, the boys can drop in anytime for pizza or punch. From Flaming